which is really a step change from the way you've been building planes all these years.
When you talk about how we've been building planes all these years, certainly the introduction of new materials and taking the steps that I showed you before on the chart of having 50% composite, and then also redesigning the fuselage and improving the interior of the cabins has caused us to take a look at all the ancillary processes and how we manufacture airplanes. So that has been a big step function for us. The next major step function that we will take will actually be driven by the rate at which we have to deliver airplanes. We have the technologies down. We're always looking for new technologies, but now we have to deliver in a more timely fashion than we have been. We have a very healthy backlog, so we don't want our customers to wait too long for their products. So that will drive changes on the manufacturing floor, and not just spot changes where we'll put some automation here and we'll do this a little leaner. We have to look at the whole system and possibly take a step function as to what the future factory looks like for us.
Good, thanks. Could I ask you, Ron, something similar from you? Would you like to comment?
Sure. I think the need for information is still out there, and information sharing, particularly in real time, will eliminate some of the blind spots that we see in terms of trying to achieve supply chain integrity and safeguarding the supply. So the data are out there. Converting those data into information is what's the key, and eliminate the blind spots, so that from a anti-counterfeiting standpoint or just a general efficiency and effectiveness of supply chain management, we need to share more information upstream and downstream.
Good. Leo, from your program perspective, obviously you are there to help. What would, I know you mentioned even engaging with the customers and so forth. Do you have one maybe energy efficiency program that these people could take advantage of, or do you have some recommended, initiative that they could undertake?
Yes, we do, and in fact, we had one solicitation out that was called Innovative Manufacturing Initiative, and there was a tremendous response from the country. 1,400 responses to one initiative from DOE on Innovative Manufacturing Initiative. That was the name of the program. So there's a lot of pent-up demand there. But I want to give you an example of the kinds of things that would be truly transformative, and I'll go one quickly historical one and then get back. In the 1880s, aluminum was a precious metal. Aluminum was a precious metal. In fact, when you come to Washington, if you go to the top of the Washington Monument, the top of the Washington Monument is made out of aluminum. And the reason that was done is that aluminum at that time was precious metal, and the nation showed its wealth by having aluminum up there. Reputedly, Napoleon used to give his honored guests aluminum because about the same price as, very similar to gold. Then a step change happened. The reason aluminum was so expensive was it was a chemical process. A step change happened. Aluminum, an electrolytic process came along, completely changed it. Today, aluminum is $1 a pound. Gold is, $1,400 a pound. So a process change dramatically changed. The industry created an industrial core, came out of this. Today, titanium is potentially in the same place. There are transformative changes like that that could happen in manufacturing, and we're interested in hearing from you that you have those ideas. And in the case of titanium, for example, if the same transformation could happen, we would save 90% of the energy that currently goes into an aluminum product. Additive manufacturing is another one. Mass production, it's a big issue. A lot of people have advantage. But what about mass customization? What about the 3D printing that some of you may not know? What if we put all of the technology in the printer? You have this technology.
Start sorting them.
And so instead of qualifying every part, we have such a robust printing machine, if you wish, that every product that comes out is fully qualified and fully reliable. All of a sudden, we have mass customization at a reasonable cost. So we're looking for those kinds of transformative ideas that save energy and make productivity.
Good. I think as every speaker, in fact, has said, I think somehow got meld technology with processes. And I think in manufacturing, processes are so important, you know, as deploy new technologies. Technologies can help us create new processes. So I think they go hand in hand. John, the customer you talked about, you know, a few years ago, they used the field bus technology. Today, what would you recommend, some advice you have if someone is building a new plant today? What kind of things should they consider? Any advice, any comments that you like to make?
Sure. First, I'll answer your question. I'd like to throw another comment in on the manufacturing side of things as well. Anyone contemplating building a plant today, to me, should really think through the entire approach, not only to the basic automation, but to what's going on above the automation. And I really do believe in a lot of the things that Andy pointed out in his keynote, that pulling the data up, you know, certainly you may not want that data to go off into the ethereal cloud, but you can have it more centralized, because today automation can be a differentiator. It always has been, but it has to work in concert with the available data and also with the available knowledge base that you have across the world in your people. Not every plant location is going to have an expert in everything, but to be able to bring a collaborative effort together remotely and have that data right in front of that person, no matter where they are, can really help from an automation point of view. And if I could just briefly throw in one other concept that I think is going on that's not so technical, but also equally important. Many of us just lived through a couple of very big supply chain disruptions: the tsunami in Japan and the floods in Thailand. And if you weren't impacted by this, you're very fortunate. So many things come from concentrated locations these days that a major event like an earthquake or a flood can cause huge disruptions all across the globe. I think we need to rethink supply chain, because we will be heading to a time when not only these things continue to happen, but logistics costs are going to go up. And what I think will evolve for most manufacturers is more of a regional strategy, where your U.S. consumption is produced in the U.S. and your European consumption is produced somewhere in Europe. Your Asian consumption is produced somewhere in Asia, with the plant's abilities to back each other up in the event of some severe supply chain disruption. So it's another thing to think about.
Yeah, right.
Well, we're trying to get better at managing supply chain. When we came together and merged together, we realized that oftentimes we were the confusing factor to the supply chain. They would look at Boeing, but see a different part of the company, and we were always overdoing the same thing. So we have consolidated our act and tried to get it together so that we present a much more clarified approach to our suppliers. Now, what we'd like to do, what we're continuing to do, is work more closely with our suppliers so they understand the requirements a lot better. It's not enough just to write specs and throw them at the suppliers, but to really understand capabilities and take advantage of that, and have them let us know what works and doesn't work. So it is a large issue for us to continually improve that area. And it will, 60% of what we make comes from our suppliers. So it's a huge thing that we have to look at. But it's working together, making clear requirements, and understanding capabilities a lot better.
One is, I think, the topics that came already up, tracking and tracing. I mean, it is absolutely key that you're able to track back which kind of materials you used in which products. This needs an established system in your company. This needs a manufacturing execution system that can create this transparency. It needs the use of intelligent tags. Sometimes you can do it with a barcode. Often you need to invest in RFID tags. That's what we are looking at, especially when we look at more expensive parts. You think of a gas turbine. There you really want to track back exactly when was a blade produced where and which quality came in. So I think that's one of the core elements that we look at in supply chain. However, there's also the moment which was described before where supply chain is completely interrupted. Where for some reason, a natural disaster or some other item that happened which was completely unforeseen, you're not able to get these specific parts that were specifically designed for your own use. And we all, I assume you all had these situations. The question is then what to do. And I believe there the possibility to go through a redesign with an enormous speed is absolutely key. You will not always be able to get the same part. So how do you manage redesigns? And that's something which goes back to what I described before. Now, when you're able to connect the design process with the manufacturing process, and we dreamt about this on the green field. Today it's possible in the brown field. Today it's possible in reality. If you're able to go through this with the speed actually which we did right now with the crisis in Japan, we had some parts of our production, of our supply chain, which we had to redesign, and we were able to do this in times which were less than half of the normal time. And I think this is something you have to look at, to how to create alternatives by relatively fast reaction speed.
Yeah, excellent question. So, you start with the adage that, you feel like a victim. We don't know what we don't know. And that's true, because the very nature of counterfeiting is very clandestine. They're hidden from the normal information flow that takes place upstream, downstream, and with all the trading partners. But maybe a revision on that adage is we don't even know what we do know. And I think that's where we need to begin, to share the information so that we're all interested in things like demand sensing and balancing supply and demand. Well, if you're shipping more than you normally ship into a certain channel of trade, you've got to ask yourself, is that a market share increase? Did you run a promotion? Or could it be that some of that product's leaking away from that channel into another channel? Okay, but without the information from your supply partners, you won't necessarily get to that right answer. Conversely, if you were shipping a certain amount of volume each month into a channel, and suddenly there's a dramatic reduction in the demand going into that channel, it wouldn't hurt to ask yourself, is that demand still there? It's just being filled by an illegal or illegitimate source. And when you start sharing that information on demand-supply balancing with your trading partners, you'd be surprised what'll come up. And then that then targets your investigations or your marketing or your market monitoring, and then lend itself to technology that you could then apply, because that's what we would call a high-risk area. Highly volatile demand signals coming in, different supply month to month. So that's where you might want to put some monitoring, some technology, or maybe investigate a little bit further. But we've got to at least harness the information that's already out there so that we know what we do know.
Well, the first, get on the web, come to visit our website and just identify either myself or one of the folks in my office, and please make contact. We try to contact to reply to everybody and connect with everybody. The associations and NEMA and other organizations like that, the trade associations are good bodies for single point contact. I am here today as part of that outreach, and I will gladly go to meetings like this to sort of communicate with you. So please don't hesitate to contact us directly. We do have formal solicitations, and they appear on the website as well. I know there are too many websites in the world. We don't have time to go to them all. I mean, it is true. We're overwhelmed. But the point is, if you do want to engage with us, that is a good site. And then if that doesn't work for you, just pick up your cell phone and call me.
I think one point is, which is important, that the suppliers really cooperate there, that we define joint standards. And I think the initiative, where Siemens is a founding member of the Industrial Energy Efficiency Coalition, which you hear about during this conference, is a very important one. It makes it easier for the user really to apply this. But then the second question still is, what do you do? What do you do on Monday morning when you're back in the office, or on Friday, depending when you go back? How do you really attack it? We all know 70% of energy is consumed by industry. So there is an enormous opportunity. When you look then deeper into the factories, a lot is consumed by motors, electrical motors. So how do you really address it? And what we do there with our customers is that we really go through an evaluation of their water and energy. Very often in food and beverage industries, water is very relevant. Water and energy use, and we do a complete audit and then go together through this. What are the opportunities really to attack these kind of energy users or overusers, and how to reduce really the energy use? And what we have seen, I gave the example before, I did not personally expect an MGM site this, but it has a very nice payback and at the same time a very positive influence on the environment. So the question is, how do you really address it? I think the real right process is to go through a defined and structured audit.
I was just going to say that the recently enacted 50001, ISO 50001 is a good starting point for the management. We on our website also have tools that you can use to implement. These are first generation. They're tools that form the backbone for larger organizations to build upon. And certified professionals, and we do some of that, certified energy management professionals, we have programs for training and certifying people. So when you call somebody in, you know they have some background and they have some credentials. And that's something that perhaps the government can do, which is to sort of have standardized professionals, certified professionals and training and so on. And most of that on our website is, of course, free. There are some costs associated with the training if you go to on-site training, but the rest of it is free.
I'm going to answer that question perhaps in a slightly different way than you expect. I think the culture of collaboration, innovation, and everything we've talked about this morning starts with leadership. And the leadership, not only at the top, but the key functional groups, the leadership, just in general, whether it's an internal project that has a project manager who has people who don't directly report to that project manager, but yet that project manager has to get the group to coalesce and deliver the results of that project. Or whether it's the CEO. And at our company, we've had a long history of a very formal leadership development process. It starts, of course, with attracting and retaining the best people you possibly can, and I won't go into all the ways you can do that. You probably know that as well. But then once people with a bright future, let's say, are identified, we start a series of training courses called executive leadership. We also tell them that we think they have a bright future. We provide access directly for them to go to the CEO or the leader of the business if they're frustrated in their career. And we give them live examples. And then what we do, we did this in my day, it still goes on, is the key people that we've identified of all ages and basically all functions. The top management team meets regularly to review the progress of those people, even if they are not part of that particular person's organization. So we sit and talk about each other's people, for example. And if a high potential person has not had a significant responsibility change or promotion in the last 2 years, that's flagged, and we have to take immediate action to make it happen. Because the whole culture of a company comes from its leadership and from the continuity of its leadership. And so I think it starts with leadership development.
I really think it fits enormously well together, and it's probably today common in all large companies. Exactly what John described. This is what we do in Siemens too. We look at the different talents, we give them exposure through projects, and I think that's important. They feel it, that we really care about them. However, we added 2 aspects to it. One is, which I think is important, we have to be careful moving people too much around. You need both. You need the managerial talent that gets exposure in different areas, but you also need the expert. You need the person who has really been developed in its own area and knows it in and out. I think we need the healthy mix, and that's exactly what we're trying, and that's how we look at talents. But we also start very early on, and I mentioned before the program we do, for example, in our Charlotte plant. This goes back to something which is very close to our history. Siemens develops every year 10,000 apprentices. 10,000 apprentices. We do this mostly in Germany today, but we are starting now to move more and more of this process where we combine learning with working. Very early on, these are very young people, just out of high school, where we bring them into the company and educate them on new technologies on all levels. It's on the engineering level, but it's also on the operator level. And I strongly believe the only way that we stay very competitive in the developed countries is by investing heavily in the future of our country and of our companies in this way.
We also have a leadership development program. We don't have an apprenticeship program, but we are reaching out earlier and earlier to identify talent and try to capture it for the company. Because we think that is the key to making us a lot more competitive and to allow us to take the big steps into the future. There's another component of it, and that involves leadership at all levels, but it has to come from the top, is the communication of the message of collaboration. We can develop leaders, we can develop people technically to do what we need them to do, but we have to create an environment where they are open to seeking out other people's help. Everybody wants to be the hero and be the one who solves the problem. But we're providing incentives for people who ask for help and actually come up with a better solution by getting the right help from the rest of the company. And all of us represent fairly dispersed companies where you have to reach out across geographical barriers, across cultural barriers. So changing the culture for us also involves communication of the message of collaboration, as well as providing incentives to reward the right types of behavior.
I just wanted to add one thought that I've learned in my time with the Department of Defense and working with our military men and women, the sense of responsibility and authority. It is really important for the people to be responsible for their actions, to have the authority, but to be responsible. If you look at our own careers, you know, when you're responsible for sending a message to your CEO, to the secretary, if I say it, it's my responsibility to be correct, no matter where that information came from. And once the people, our colleagues and our workers, they all feel responsible for their work, whatever it is, however big or small, then I think their attitude changes. I will say this, that in the military you can always delegate the authority, but you can never delegate the responsibility. If the ship goes aground, the captain gets fired, no matter who was at the bridge at the time, it's his responsibility or her responsibility. Good. So that's a very important message, I think, that we need to empower people to have that sense of authority and responsibility.
Distinction between leadership and performance. I think we as companies all do a very good job of cascading down the objectives of the company, the mission, get it down to individual performance objectives and goals. And those processes then lead to things like performance ratings and incentives and financial benefits of the individual, as well as more opportunity. The part that needs more work is on the leadership side. I think we indiscriminately sometimes say we're trying to build good leaders. It was mentioned a couple of times. What does that really mean? And the same way as you identify a cascade of priorities and objectives for each individual and each department, it's important to also explain what do we mean by leadership. You know, as Leo just mentioned, what are those standards of performance around being a leader? The accountability, ethical behavior, making sure that you do collaborate, you develop people, and so forth. So this make the leadership concept very specific, and then particularly for your middle managers, they get to see it, and they see it in action with their superiors, and it becomes just as objective, as you will, as the performance ratings and so on.
After my engineering degree in Germany, I got my MBA in Chicago some years ago, 20 years more or less. And when I said I'm joining an engineering company, my friends looked at me and said, well, Helmuth, that's nice, but you know, this is yesterday. I mean, finance is where you got to go. I was back at the same university, University of Chicago, last autumn. And I talked to the second-year students, and we talked about what is the next steps they're taking. You know what's interesting? Half of them talked about engineering companies. Half of them talked about operations, about manufacturing, about the excitement of producing something. Not all of them, but it was a major mind change, which I personally could observe there. So I think, first of all, we are at the right time. So there is a perception there that's obviously not too bad to design and manufacture something. Now the question is, how do we keep this up and foster this even further? And I think there it goes back to what we have heard before. It starts at the top. We as leaders, we as people that really know the business, we have to go out there and talk to them. We have to go to the schools, we have to go to the universities and spend time on this. We do have some programs running where members of our team really go into high schools and they talk there for an hour about how an engineer job looks. And I think this is exciting because there you can bring people close to them. Not all of them, but you can excite young people. They're ready for this excitement, I think. We just have to put personal time into this.
I would say also just some perhaps more practical or step kind of things. The social networks are very important. You need a presence on all of those as a company. You do need more than just showing up at the placement service to do interviews. You need strong relationships with the universities around the world, which include things like donating equipment if you're an equipment manufacturer, or time, sponsoring scholarships, internships, co-ops, all of these kinds of things, having a physical presence there to talk up the value of our profession in automation. I also agree that it starts in the elementary and secondary area. I am probably sitting here today because President Kennedy in 1961 said, we're going to go to the moon. All of a sudden, the drive, even down in the elementary school, I was in 8th grade, but it was like, hey, we're behind, we need to catch up technically, we're going to need engineers, and there was a big push for people to go into engineering. There is no real equivalent to that today, and I'm not necessarily advocating another space program, but the thing to inspire people, a goal, a visible thing that you can get your arms around and say, this is what we're going to accomplish, it needs to be there. And in order to get that out there, whatever it is, whether they're political leaders or business leaders, there just needs to be a lot more public face about engineering as a profession. I've always called it a noble profession. It's not appreciated very much, but I think we can attract people in if all of us, no matter what we do in our jobs, have that as a goal to talk up and explain what it is and what we do.
And you know, our Sputnik moment, if you like to take that analogy right now, is really the environment and our efficiency and so on. I think if you talk to young people today, you know, and just even a rough sampling, they care about the environment, they care about the planet, they're dedicated, they really do want to work in that area. We just have to give them the opportunity. We have to show them how, in fact, industry and engineering can help mitigate those problems and so on. I would suggest this, opening your doors to the young people, just showing them. It's completely different to seeing a PowerPoint presentation or even a wonderful movie works well, but actually bringing them in and actually showing them is really important. And it goes all the way from day visits, open days, you know, for your local schools, all the way to the internships and co-ops, which we will also fund to do some kind of stuff. And finally, one item, talk to the teachers, to the career council. Bring the teachers into your plant, because the one teacher will infect 20, and depending on what school district you're in, 20 kids this year and 20 kids next year and so on. Teachers are the people that disseminate the information. And I know my daughter learns everything from her teacher. And therefore, what happens is when the teacher says engineering and manufacturing is a clean, smart job, that matters. So I think the teachers are the conduits sometimes to the children, and that can help a lot.
All of these ways of reaching out to people and the future workforce are very, very important. And Leo probably already knows too, reaching out to teachers. We have the materials camp for teachers where we actually have standardized ways of teaching teachers about materials so they can incorporate it into their curriculum. The other thing that has been mentioned up here is talking to the parents at PTO meetings, because while the students often are very driven by energy issues, by community service issues, this is a group of kids I found really wants to reach out and help the world. And we can show them how to help them as engineers, like Engineers Without Borders and other things that we do. But the parents are concerned that they have meaningful jobs. So talking to PTO groups and talking to parents so they understand what engineering can really do for their child, because these kids see their parents every day. So if they don't have the role models at home, like Leo and his daughter, then the parents can talk about it. Well, you had I heard somebody at school talk about engineering. They were really excited. It's a great career. Maybe you should consider this.
I know when I joined the workforce, I had 2 engineering degrees under my belt, and I thought that was all I'd ever learn, and now I got to apply it for the rest of my career in business. I don't think we stress enough the importance of our companies as universities. Continue to learn as you go through the work at hand, working with others, learning new technologies, new ways of doing business. And I think if we position that with the traditional universities, the traditional educational process, it's not a strong line of demarcation between education and work. It actually continues your educational process. I think that's a key point that we miss sometimes with our young people.
Students would love to see the real thing. Bring your products into the universities. We have relationships on our PLM side with 10,000 universities. We train more than 1.1 million students every year with this. And this is growing enormously. They don't want to see the theoretical stuff. They want to see the real stuff. And I think there's an enormous opportunity for all of us. Providers, but all of you too. I mean, they like to see the real product. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to create fascination for engineering.
Right. In
thinking about innovation, whether you are a supplier or an operator or an engineering contractor, and we probably have all of these and more, the press and everyone represented here. I think it starts with, again, leadership recognizing that innovation is not just kind of like a yoga thing. It's a way to win, okay? It is a clear way to take your company and differentiate it, make it more competitive on the global scale. So it starts with placing it up there as part of your strategy. Then I would say you need a very robust, repetitive process for deciding what you spend your time on. And during that time, it's all, when you're trying to decide, it can be very chaotic. You want ideas from everywhere. You want to encourage. It looks very disorganized. In fact, in our company, we called the process WrestleMania, okay? But the result of the process was a series of priorities that, you know, we felt were going to differentiate the company. And those priorities were clearly communicated. The next step is you don't cut the funding for those important priorities even if financial conditions change. Because the best way to send the wrong message about the importance of innovation is to slash an R&D budget because the financial situation is tight, and we've all gone through tight financial situations. You can't do everything, but those top priorities have to continue to be funded. And then the final thing I'd say is celebrate and reward the innovation, be it small or medium or large. Make the people who have developed and delivered the innovation heroes inside the company through recognition, through talking about their stories in webcasts to the others employees. You know, make it something that people aspire to. And so you can get it inside the culture that way, and then it just sort of takes off and keeps on going. But it needs a big push to get it started.
Again, I can only agree, John, we need more time together. That's really fascinating. So I fully agree with everything you said. And if you look at Siemens, we are spending only in the US $1.3 billion, only in the US, $1.3 billion in R&D. 7,000 people only in the US working in R&D. And we keep the spending very high, economy going up and going down. So I fully agree with John. If you have defined these real innovative topics, the worst thing you can do is to cut them because of economies going up and down. Economies will keep on going up and down, and innovation is never short term. I, however, would like to add one aspect to it. We all know the old formula, it's 1% genius and 99% hard work. And I strongly believe this is really how innovation is driven. Having said this, I think sometimes we get hung up somehow in innovation processes. And this is very risky. And then innovation becomes flat. I think what we always have to keep in mind is, what is the goal at the end of the day? And I would like to give you an example. When we started to revamp our whole PLM process tool environment, we came up with all the requirements, and everybody had another idea, and this should be implemented, and this is what I already have, I cannot avoid this, et cetera, et cetera. And you know this when you do a process change. Now, nobody wants to give away anything of what he already did. But and then everything has to come on top. The whole thing becomes incredibly complex. How did we break it? We said, well, the target is not to have the same thing as you had yesterday. The target is reduce time to market by 50%. Reaction was absolutely impossible. 50%, maybe 5, maybe 10, 50% absolutely impossible. By having this discussion for 1 month, 2 months with the direct R&D leaders in the company, after a while we realized that there are opportunities out there which are very, very different and we didn't see before. By having a radical goal, you can really create steps and changes that you did not even think of were possible before. And we brought out a new product family then really internally, so we design and manufacture ourselves with our own design tools, where we are 50% faster to market for the whole product family. It was possible.
I think it's enormous. If you have this goal and you get people excited after they're over the hump, then you can create innovations in processes, in products that were not possible to think of before.
I agree with being careful about the funding, not to pull the the rug under people. And so we're looking at multi-year funding of certain projects. We review them, but if the reviews are okay, then they don't have to go through the same arduous process every year to do things. The other thing is to, on top of the celebration, is to actually see your innovation at work, seeing it on a product, seeing it in the plant, helping to improve some aspect of productivity, makes people very proud and tends to spread the word around that these kinds of things are it's very satisfying to see it. The other thing beyond that is taking somebody's great idea and using it somewhere else in the company. And that people are very proud of. Not only have I helped an immediate thing that's gone on here, but we've replicated it somewhere else because it's so good.
I like the part of the innovation process that really checks for usability, user-friendliness, and can that technology or that innovation become ubiquitous. I think that's where we've seen throughout society some of the best innovations to come along. Microsoft, we don't talk about it so much, but that made us all use, computer literate by working with their tools. Steve Jobs and some of the things that come out of Apple and continue to come out of Apple regarding not only the device, but more importantly, I think it's the applications off the device. One little example in this field of anti-counterfeiting, the ubiquity of cell phones. I think there are pretty close to 2 billion of them now in the world, at least 1.5 billion. Well, there are some companies that are innovating around using the cell phone for the authentication device that we talked about, whether you be a consumer, a retailer, or someone in the distribution network. And what it amounts to is with a unique code on each product or package, you have almost like a lottery ticket. You scratch off a number and then text that number into a central database, central repository, and it'll come back with a signal saying, yes, it's good, that number is unique, and it validates, or no, please call this number, there may be something wrong with the package. Now we're taking the role and the task, the accountability of protecting the supply chain to everyone who has a mobile device. And I think there's probably many, many applications for using our cell phones to drive business value across all of your work. And certainly in healthcare, we know there's still a shortage of technology coming in and improving upon healthcare. So this is one, I don't want to mention a company because there are several of them now developing that capability for point authentication and instant feedback. You'll learn so much more about where that product is, and you protect the privacy and all those things. That's not a challenge, but at least you know where that is. We face that now with credit cards, right? Don't you enjoy when you get that call from American Express saying, were you in San Francisco yesterday buying $20,000 worth of home entertainment equipment? Right. So we like those alerts and those checks and so forth, and I think they will become mainstream in the years ahead, if for no other reason, certainly to protect against the violators of our supply chain.
Being at DARPA the last 12 years, I got exposed to a lot of ideas. It's sort of a place where people come and give you their ideas, and I saw a lot of innovation, and over the years you get the experience, and quite frankly, I could kill anyone. I could find 1,000 reasons to nobody could go past me if I didn't want them to, quite frankly. I mean, because, that won't work for this or the other. So the first thing to do about innovation is to be open to the fact that perhaps this is a good idea. It's half full, it's not half empty. So giving the people the opportunity to pursue an idea that perhaps they haven't even really thought through correctly themselves or fully, and just giving them some questions to think it through. But then I would ask them this question, let's turn the tables around. If you were me, would you invest in this? Are you willing to put your 401k money on this? Try to see, what I used to try to understand is the commitment of people. Would you invest your lunch money on this? Would you invest your 401k in this idea of yours? And why? Why do you think it's so good? So again, it's part of the having them being involved in the decision, then you're not just turning them off. Oh, that's a bad idea. This manager isn't a good manager. He doesn't hear good ideas. Let them get in your shoes. Turn the table around. Say, okay, you have 50, 100, $500 million. Is this what you want to spend it on? Or would you spend it on something else? Getting them to think in your shoes sometimes sharpens their ideas too.